For all verified facts, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome. India's COVID-19 cases are rising once again at record levels. You don't need me to tell you that. But one of the solutions clearly in the medium to longer term could have been a very, very effective vaccine rollout. Now, where do we stand there today? We've administered about 90 million vaccines across the country. I don't need to remind everyone that we are a population of more than 1.3 billion, but also a large part of it, almost 65%, is under 30. So may not be seeking a vaccine right now, but may need it at some point. Also, equally, we have exported about 65 million vaccines as per commitments that we've made. And when I say we, I mean private sector manufacturers like the Serum Institute in India or Pune, to be more specific. So that was contracted much before the crisis really took hold in the manner that it did. And obviously, we are at a position today where we seem to need more vaccines within India, and we don't have them and are unlikely to have them at the scale at which we want them. So two questions that we want to address today. First is, what is the kind of capacity that we're looking at in terms of run rate utilization, both domestically and globally? Remember, at this point, we cannot import vaccines even if we want to, and all flow of vaccines, whether within this country or going out from this country, are all controlled by the central government, though they are manufactured by private sector companies. So where do we stand in terms of sheer capacity, movement and logistics? The second and more important question in some ways is the public health question. If we are where we are in terms of our vaccine availability, rollout, and likely shortfalls, then what could this mean from a public health point of view, particularly in the context of the numbers that are rising, which are over 120,000 cases a day, which is much higher than the first wave that we saw in 2020. So could this get worse, or do we have to start thinking in terms of either more aggressive or defensive solutions as if we want to fix the problem or arrest the problem of COVID-19? So those are the two questions we want to address. The two people we are doing this with, and I'm happy to introduce, are Dr. Giridhar Babu, Professor and Head Life Course Epidemiology at the Public Health in the PHFI of India. Dr. Babu is a master's in public health and a PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and he began as a resident at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I'm also happy to be joined by Nithya Subramanian. She is a pharmaceutical and healthcare analyst at Sanford, Bernstein, a research and broking house who has been tracking pharmaceuticals very actively for many years now. Thank you both for joining me. So let me get a sense on the public health challenge as it stands today right now. So Dr. Babu, why don't you go first?
Yeah, in terms of the public health challenge, if we were to just look at just the vulnerable people within the country, 1 in 3 adults have high blood pressure, 1 in 10 have type 2 diabetes mellitus among the adults. If they are not covered in the next few months, the kind of risks that they'll have in terms of severeness and also higher mortality is high. So it's imperative that we will have to cover at least the vulnerable as soon as possible and then think of expanding to other age groups. The second reason why we need to vaccinate at the same time as containing is that there are different variants developing because of high circulation. As we all know, aware, once there is high circulation, there is chances of higher degree of mutation, and some of them might result in newer variants. So in terms of updating the vaccines with these kind of newer variants is also a challenge. So therefore, the vaccine manufacturers will have to be kept in loop with the changing scenario. So from a public health point of view, it's not only important to expand the coverage as soon as possible, but also update the vaccines based on the emerging scenario.
Right. Okay. And when you talked about the vulnerable population, Dr. Babu, could you put a number on that?
Yeah. So if you were to look at least the government's initial data, they looked at 30 crore as so 300 million as the vulnerable population within the country. And even at this rate, if you were to just look at hypertension and diabetes mellitus, by the numbers I gave, 1 in 10 adults having type 2 diabetes and 1 in 3 having the high blood pressure, it is very important that we reach out to everybody. So the good thing is we do not have to diagnose. Anybody over 45 years has to be reached now, and then probably in the next set of relaxation, maybe a younger age group can be expanded.
Right. Okay. So we'll come back to the public health challenges as things stand today. Nithya, tell us about how you see vaccine production and output both globally and India from a pure capacity point of view.
So globally, I think if you look at all the vaccine manufacturers and add up all the capacities that have been announced, there is actually 14 billion doses of capacities that have been announced. So between Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Novavax, J&J, it actually adds up to 14 billion doses. The number itself is heartening because if you assume that the global population is 7 billion, 60% to get to herd immunity, 2 doses, whatever wastage you want to assume, I think that's actually enough to cover the global population. But unfortunately, while announcements have been made, some of the actual capacities still remain unidentified, and there is a huge disparity between the capacities announced for your developed nations versus the capacities announced for your developing countries. There is a fair amount of supply-demand gap when you look at it from a market perspective, right? Your US, Europe, for example, have double booked, triple booked the number of vaccines that's actually required for their population. While that's not the case in a market like Chile or in Argentina or Ukraine, these are all markets that are seeing pretty high burden of COVID diseases, right? So now dialing down to India. So pre-COVID, before COVID, between Serum Institute of India, Bharat Biotech, BioE, we actually had about 2.3 billion doses capacity. Serum has so far struck two manufacturing relationships. One with AstraZeneca promising 1 billion doses, and one with Novavax again promising 1 billion doses. So I understand that their plan is to repurpose as much of their existing capacities as possible. But they had also announced that they're setting up additional manufacturing capacities for up to another 1 billion doses. Now, that is not something that will materialize overnight. It's going to take them a bit of time. So 2022 is possibly when the new capacity can actually see the light of the day. So what we're really looking at is the existing capacities for Serum is around 1.3, 1.5 billion doses. That's the total capacities that they have. So far, I think based on all the reports that we have seen, the current capacities is about 70 odd million doses is what they're manufacturing per month of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Bharat Biotech, unfortunately, is much lower than that. I think my understanding is it's around 5 to 10 million doses output today. So, which is probably, if you add all of that up, we're kind of at the run rate. So, how much ever they're producing, we're actually consuming, given that a vaccination dissemination is also picked up to almost 4 million to 5 million doses per day. So, I think we really need them to step up so that we can actually get ahead of the game.
So when we say Serum Institute has 1 billion doses of capacity, we are really talking about an annual capacity.
Yes, absolutely. We are talking about annual capacities, and we're also talking about capacities for different types of vaccines, right? Not everything can be repurposed to suddenly start making COVID vaccines. Different vaccines are based on very different technologies, and repurposing does not again happen overnight. So they have been able to repurpose up to 70 to 80 million doses per month. That's the run rate they are at right now. And even that is not likely enough, because remember, they've also committed up to 200 million doses to Gavi, to the COVAX facility. And some of that they have supplied, but those commitments still remain.
Right. Okay. So if you were to now compute in terms of current run rate, right? So there was a backlog of vaccines which all got manufactured and then was distributed, and many across the country have already got their first and even second doses. So we are really now looking at what is produced every day or almost every day or week and what is being consumed every day or week. Am I correct?
Yes, we are almost very close in terms of how much we're producing and how much we're consuming. And if we want to expand the eligibility population, which I'm assuming we would want to sometime soon, I think it's imperative that manufacturers like SI and Bharat Biotech step up their capacities.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to come back to the global capacity and that sort of, at least for a moment, heartening number that you gave us. Dr. Babu, can I now understand from you? So many people have got their first doses. Most people, frontline health workers, have likely got their first, maybe even second doses. Or do you feel that's not the case?
No, I think initially there was some problem in terms of communication regarding when the Covaxin would be available, what kind of regulatory status does clinical trial mode mean. So therefore, there was some time required for health workers to catch up with the vaccination pace. But the moment it was opened up for those with comorbidities and above 60 years, I must say that at least those who are well aware of the vaccination process, those who have the wherewithal of registering on their own, they are able to get vaccinated. While the supply constraint is one issue, the whole thing about how to administer the vaccination in the field settings, how to mobilize the people, especially those who are not aware or who cannot on their own register. So that requires special efforts. I think that's where even the Honorable Prime Minister was hinting yesterday that people have to mobilize others. One person has to mobilize 10 more people. So that is the kind of campaign that has to occur now in vaccination. So there is a great deal of improvement required in covering. But since the supply constraints are there, I'm not sure improving the communication and going in a campaign mode will actually be beneficial. So once the supply constraints are removed and then you facilitate higher demand, then there will be not major problems in the field.
So how did we move from that? I'm in Mumbai, and I can tell you that even until the last week of March and even into the first week of April, not all centers were going full. As in, a lot of people were not. I mean, obviously, a lot of doses were going unutilized, and that was the case in many other parts of the country as well. And then we are in, let's say, the second week of April, where we have suddenly reached a point of many centers putting up the shutters and saying that come back later.
So there are two things happening. Now, initially, as I said, for other vaccination programs, there is something called micro planning. People actually know who are the beneficiaries and which is the vaccination site and how many of them are covered by one vaccination site. So this is pretty clear in most vaccination programs. Unlike those programs, here it is centralized, uploading of the documentation. People can choose any center they want. Some of them have walk-in option. Therefore, there is a mix of, you cannot really predict at the level of center in terms of what it is going to be. Initially, people wanted somebody else to get vaccinated and then they'll get vaccinated. So they waited for the health workers, then they waited for their family, friends. But now, once the second wave has started picking up, it's like almost magical thinking that maybe now we get vaccinated, since the cases are rising, it will benefit. Although the benefit will kick in only after 2 weeks, after 2 doses, and that too in preventing deaths or severe illness. But even the states demanding more vaccine to vaccinate every person above 18 years is with this notion that it will reduce cases, which is not really going to help them if that is the objective. But therefore, I think these cases have sort of created this panic, fear. And probably that is one of the factors. And also communication from the local governments and the central government in terms of improving the vaccination. I think once you leave it to the general population in terms of, this is important and you should come get vaccinated. And once interpersonal communication campaigns are strengthened, the coverage will automatically improve.
Right. Okay. And though it is an interesting conundrum that we have to battle or address vaccine hesitancy and vaccine supply and demand at the same time. So usually, maybe as you said, that it's almost like launching a product into advertising a product and then not being ready with the launch. So let me come back to you, Nithya. So you gave a global figure. You said we have the likely commitment of almost 14 billion doses, which is literally on paper at least covers the entire planet. Now, even assuming all of this or much of this were to start rolling out, what is the likely timeline? Where could it go? Who is likely to grab it first, and so on?
That unfortunately is the billion-dollar question, right? We've got about 3 billion doses capacity that have been announced by 2 of the Chinese manufacturers, Sinovac and Sinopharm. Pfizer's announced 1 billion doses or more just from the BioNTech manufacturing facility. Now, after J&J got an approval through a manufacturing partnership with BioE. Now, BioE is another large Indian manufacturer with huge capacities, whose capacity should kick in once they start manufacturing the J&J vaccine. But I think I'm actually not able to give you a straight answer because a lot of times announced capacities don't pan out the way it is anticipated. We have seen several hiccups along the way. We have seen, for example, Emergent is a contract manufacturer which both J&J and AstraZeneca partnered with in the US, but they have had a lot of manufacturing challenges. Almost 2 billion doses went to waste because of various issues that they had in the plant. Now J&J is taken over. So unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer for you.
Right.
15 billion is what has been announced. I mean, I'm hoping that a lot of it will materialize, but it's anybody's guess as to how much exactly we will see in 2021.
Right. So let me put the other slightly more tricky question to both you and Dr. Babu. And let me begin with you, Nithya. So assuming, let's say, we were to free up imports and to free up pricing outside of, let's say, government dispensaries and government hospitals, which could potentially send the right price signals out into the market. Could that change things in terms of supplies from your purely looking at it as a business analyst?
So I think DRL and the Sputnik 5 vaccine is the one where I think possibly an emergency use authorization is imminent. Now through DRL, the Sputnik 5 has announced that RDIF has promised about 250 million treatments or 500 million doses. So if they do get an EUA sometime soon, that's some additional capacities that are likely to show up for India. The other one to watch out for is Zydus. Zydus hopefully is again wrapping up their phase 3 clinical trial. So that's another 120, 140 million doses additional capacities that could show up in the market. Now, beyond that, if you're again removing any import restrictions, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are again options that can be made available. But I think the DCGI has been pretty particular that they want to see bridging studies in India before giving companies an approval to sell in India. So even if the import restrictions are lifted and the pricing challenge is no longer relevant, I think these companies will need enough of an incentive to do the bridging study and then register the product in India and sell. So I think I'm far more hopeful of Sputnik 5 or RDIF and Zydus's capacity showing up soon compared to Pfizer or Moderna. And the last one to watch out for would also be the BioE vaccine. They've been working on this vaccine in partnership with Baylor College London. Again, as I mentioned before, they have fairly large capacities. Again, it would be good to see their capacities kicking.
Okay. Dr. Babu, so what is the current desired run rate? And I'll come to what it is and what we have to live with. But what in your mind is the desired run rate of vaccination per day, and where are we in terms of pure domestic availability?
We have reached nearly 4 million doses per day. And if you look at the average, it's around somewhere between 3 to 3.5 million per day from the beginning. What we really require is at least 7 to 10 million doses per day just to cover the vulnerable population in the next 2 to 3 months. I mean, if we have to make some dent in terms of reducing the mortality, that's the ultimate goal, then we have to be covering them in the next 2 to 3 months. I don't see that happening with the current available only 2 vaccines. As Nithya rightly pointed out, Sputnik and Zydus will have bright potential, and even the government has announced that they might be approved in a month or two. I'm also hopeful of if somehow Johnson & Johnson, I mean, just heard the news today that they're interested in submitting an application. If that's true, and then they start the study, I am of the opinion, Govind, if the government of India could approve the Covishield based on the data from UK, even before the bridging study results were made available, the same logic should be applied to all the other vaccines. Phase 3 is done, proved safety, efficacy, and immunogenicity. Now bridging data is what is required. So why can't they be given emergency use authorization? So I'm only talking in terms of the modus operandi. If we have done this once, why can't we use the same rationale for the other vaccines?
Right, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Nithya, again, just a numbers question. We're doing 3 to 3.5 million vaccines a day. We need, in an ideal environment, about 7 to 10 million to cover the vulnerable population, as Dr. Babu says. Could you sum up again where we are if we were to achieve or want to achieve that target?
So 10 million per day, we need 300 million doses a month. So which means we need, hopefully, SII can scale up. I think I saw another announcement that they've requested some monies from the government to scale up capacities. Let's for a moment assume that they hit 100. Bharat Biotech has been working on trying to scale up their capacities to again 50 to 60 million doses. So that's another 150, 160. So we will for sure need Zydus and Sputnik 5's capacities to kick in if we want to hit that 300 million run rate.
Right. So from a pure numbers point of view, we are nowhere near what we would want. What we would desire even in the next 3 months. Am I right?
It doesn't seem like that.
Okay. Dr. Babu, now let's look at, as we head to the end of our conversation, let's look at a plan B now. Assuming we're not going to hit the target, it is going to take time. The government is not going to open up imports very easily, which would at least free up flows of some of these other vaccines or give them approvals to be imported. What should be our plan B?
Plan B, which is a sort of push to plan A right now, is to contain the ongoing surge of second wave. There's no way even, let's magically imagine government approves all the other vaccines and we start vaccinating. Even then, we will not be able to tackle the ongoing surge in cases by vaccination. It will take at least 3 months just for the effect to be visible in terms of reducing mortality. So what we right now need is very strong and aggressive containment measures, not necessitating a lockdown. Because I've always written about it. Lockdown is a lazy option at this stage. If we don't do better containment efforts, the two reasons why we should be able to reduce the transmission. A, mortality has to be brought down. Two, more the circulation, more is the chances of errors and mutations, and more is the chance of having higher chances of getting variants of concern. So for these two purposes, vaccination pace, let it pick on its own independently. At the same time, we have to pursue an aggressive containment strategy.
Okay, and could you kind of define that a little more when you say aggressive containment strategy at this point of time?
Any crowds, going in terms of, for me, crowd is, we had this conversation before in Japan, more than 2 is a crowd. Here, can we at least define more than 10 is crowd and then say, let's try to limit the crowds wherever. Full house cinemas, parties, pubs open everywhere, marriage halls. Let's remind ourselves that we were in lockdown for many months. There is a way to prevent lockdowns. Forget about the pandemic, vaccination for a while. If you don't want to be in a lockdown-like situation, especially for the poor, because it's going to be doubly fatal. If the cases increase, they're the ones who will suffer. If there is a lockdown, they're the ones who will suffer. So for their sake, the other sections of the society, which are probably better privileged, they should exercise responsibility. So crowd control is one. Testing, and this has been definitely emphasized in the yesterday's address by the PM. Testing numbers will have to, even now many states are doing rapid antigen tests. They're simply not picking up. Everybody is speaking of Maharashtra, Karnataka, which have reported in the first wave and also the second wave. There are states which are not reporting the cases at all to the level you expect. I am more concerned about those states in terms of, because the variants which will develop there because of high circulation will be a threat to everywhere. Now, New Zealand has already stopped people from India to come there. Should we then be on the list of others? Should each state be into trouble because of the variants developing in different parts of the country? So we all have to be very careful. So when I say aggressive containment strategy, there cannot be a differential strategy. We have to follow a very strict review in terms of the silent areas and ensure that we are not missing this high chances of circulation anywhere.
Right, and that's an important point, that the virus is, as we speak, mutating all the time, and therefore, and each subsequent mutation will behave differently. Some will be more dangerous, some will be less dangerous. Am I right?
That's correct. Well, see, there are errors. When the virus replicates more number of times, there will be errors, more errors. More the errors, more are the mutations. Not all mutations are fatal. Only maybe 1 in a million may be a problematic one, but we have millions of mutations going on. So we have to be careful to prevent it.
Right. Okay, Nithya, last question. So again, vaccines are the only sure cure right now, not a cure in the cure sense, but That's the only thing that can fix this problem. What's the best way to incentivize more vaccine production, supply flows, and of course, the ability to roll out to as many people as possible from your point of view when you look at the pharma industry as a whole and the way it solves problems?
See, I think one thing when I look at all the other governments, for example, the US government or Europe government, I think they've extended significant support to both vaccine developers as well as vaccine manufacturers to scale up production. Right? That is something that's been sorely lacking since the whole crisis happened. So, for example, the BARDA has spent several billions of dollars supporting R&D. They've also given like proper procurement contracts, which is what is lacking in India today. I think if you can support your manufacturers monetarily, I think the scale up is not a big challenge. We have the technology, we have the know-how. I don't think for a manufacturer like SII, which is globally the largest vaccine manufacturer, to be able to produce more vaccines should not really be a challenge. And I think the government can step up in terms of the monetary support that's going into manufacturing vaccines.
Right. We've Nithya Balasubramanian and Dr. Giridhar Babu, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I sure hope to speak to you again and hopefully in slightly better circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you.